And I think it was not until 1992 that women were allowed to call themselves farmers in the census even. So women weren't recognised as farmers until I think there was the first international conference for women in agriculture was held, and that's when women really stood up and fought for that title to say, actually, we are farmers too.
Welcome to Unearthed, the people changing Australian agriculture. I'm your host, Michael Thompson, and over the next 3 episodes, we're going to trace the evolution and impact of the AgriFutures Rural Women's Award. The awards are an amazing celebration of rural women from across the country who are driving forces in their businesses, their industries, and their communities. And we're also going to look at how the awards are empowering women to build their skills to take on new challenges and realise their biggest ideas for the future. The Rural Women's Award is this year celebrating its 25th birthday, but its origins began much, much earlier. And to understand how and why the awards came about, we need to go back in time to remember what life was like for women in rural Australia. Jeanette Long is a farmer, business consultant and chair of the Alumni Network for South Australia's Rural Women's Award.
Once I hit the workforce, very much felt that it was challenging and I was invisible, and my skills and a degree in agriculture wasn't recognised in the same way it was even in my husband.
Jeanette was one of the first women to study at Roseworthy Agricultural College, which now forms part of the University of Adelaide.
Women were only allowed into Roseworthy Ag College in about 1977. So I was there in 82. So there hadn't been many girls actually get through the program. And I was in the Roseworthy campus just a couple of weeks ago, where they had up on the wall the list of the graduates, past graduates. So 1977, I think there was one female perhaps in the list I observed. So there weren't a lot of women even in that sort of career area.
And what were the job prospects like for a female ag graduate back then?
It wasn't easy, Michael, and my mother had been a school teacher all her life, so she encouraged me to go on and do teaching, which I did. And I don't regret, though at the time I must say I didn't enjoy the course much, and realised quite quickly that teaching high school kids wasn't for me and moved into adult education. But yes, it was pretty challenging coming out of Roseworthy and getting a job in agriculture back then, which is probably where sparked my real passion around particularly supporting rural women and women who choose agriculture as a career to get them going.
Meet Lisa Palu. Fast forward to the 1990s and shift across the country to Queensland, and we find that Lisa was encountering the same experiences as Jeanette in South Australia. Intelligent, driven, passionate about agriculture and rural communities, but constrained from using her skills to her full potential.
And I had been grateful in my previous career, which was an extension agronomist with the DPI. I was the second only female that the department employed as an extension agronomist.
Yeah, wow. That really speaks to how scarce those professional careers were
and
as well.
The first female that was ever employed was this amazing woman called Dr. Elizabeth Woods, Beth Woods, who everyone knows. And she was a Rhodes Scholar, no less. The department road tested her for 7 years before they decided it was safe to employ a second female, who was me.
Lisa eventually moved on from the DPI and took a job as a rural reporter with ABC Radio, where day in, day out, she saw women held back by the societal norms.
As a female who had progressed her career in agricultural science and always been one of just a couple of women, it was disheartening as I went about my role as a rural reporter, going to lots and lots of farm association meetings, all sorts of different farmer associations, where the women were always in the background. They never held roles on the executive. They were always out the back in the tea room of these old halls in the little country towns where I visited to go to these meetings. And they were making the cups of tea and the sandwiches, but never sitting at the front, having any sort of leadership role. Although clearly, so many times I saw it, clearly they were doing the work associated with running the particular branch of that organisation.
There was one particular meeting in the small town of Gundyre in Queensland's South Burnett region where Lisa reached a point where she'd seen enough and decided it was time to act.
The day that I thought, I really can't take this any longer. I can't sit here and see this happening. It is so wrong. I've been so well supported in my career as a female, very much in the minority. Things need to change faster. I was frustrated by the pace of change. And it was a Saturday afternoon, so I was, in my 20s and dedicated to my role. So I took my Saturday, used my Saturday to go to this meeting. There were some important issues going on at the time. There was a lot of drought. Drought was a big feature. And that was a classic example of the wife who clearly was doing all the work, the husband who was the front person at the top of the table, and he had no idea what was going on. She had developed this agenda. Each agenda item he called out to her in the back room where she was with the other wives making cups of tea, and she would continually run to the front, whisper in his ear, and he'd go, "Oh, yes, that's right, blah, 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 blah," and she'd scurry back to the kitchen. This went on all afternoon. I could not believe it. That was the worst example that I'd seen. And so at this time, I'd been having conversations with the calloused crusader, as she became known, this wonderful woman called Jan Darlington.
I do actually remember Jan. I remember meeting her in Monto probably around 2000
Yes.
during the dairy deregulation, and I
Yes.
can understand why she got that nickname. Yeah.
Yes. So this was in the early 90s. She had found herself on her own with 3 small children on what was euphemistically called in those days a mixed farm. So she had pigs, a dairy, and she was growing grain. Those 3 enterprises all interacted with each other. She was on her own with 3 small children, had been left on her own after the untimely death of her husband. And there she was, trying to run this farm, trying to look after the children, but her mind, her focus very much was on her community and on rural women. She set up at that time the first rural women's network in Queensland. She was heavily involved in land care, you name it. Jan was there. She was a force of nature. That's the only way you could describe her. And she had a determination like no one else I'd ever seen. And it was probably after the Saturday at Gundyre, not long after that, I was visiting her in Monto. She lived at a place called 3 Moon. Have you ever been there, Michael?
I have. There's a 3 Moon Hotel in Monto.
There is. It's a fabulous place. It's beautiful, 3 Moon. So I was at her farm at 3 Moon, and I remember it so well, etched into my memory. It was a stinking hot day, so it must have been around the end of the year. The flies were bad because the piggery was quite close to the house. The smell was not great either, for the same reason. And we were sitting at her dining room table. She had to sort of swipe, all her paperwork and all of her bookwork and things off the table to clear a bit of space. The house was chaotic. How would it be any other way? And she made this cup of tea and we sat down and she said, "We've talked about this for long enough, Lisa. Let's do something." And we had been talking about setting up some sort of a way of recognising the contribution of rural women, to thank them, acknowledge their contribution, but to inspire other women to put their hand up. We'd been talking about that for quite some time. She said, "Let's just do it. What's the worst that could happen?" So I said, all right. So we sat down and scrap of paper. We nutted out some, what would you call it, terms of reference. So what would we be looking for? How would this work? It was just to be in our own region. So the Wide Bay Burnett was the ABC Rural Reporter Territory. So it was going to be ABC Wide Bay Burnett Rural Woman of the Year.
The ABC's initiative came as women were starting to mobilise themselves to seek acknowledgement and a voice in making decisions in farming. Groups like the Rural Women's Network and Australian Women in Agriculture had started up as women got together to make their voices heard. And so when Lisa Palu's boss, Edwina Clowes, heard of the idea for a Rural Women's Award, it struck a chord close to her heart.
So if I cast my mind back to those early 1990s, so I'd been a rural reporter with ABC Radio for a few years then, working across Orange, Rockhampton, Longreach. And I can remember those times that it was quite typical for me to be the only female or one of few females attending a conference, a field day, a meeting to report on. It was just typical. There weren't that many women at these conferences, and I didn't actually think that was a surprise. It wasn't that women weren't incredibly capable and educated and smart, knowledgeable. They just weren't there. They had the smarts, they had the nous, they knew what they were talking about. They were just pretty invisible in that stage. But it was also like a really important time. So we're talking late 80s, early 90s. So rural women were starting to really activate themselves. They were starting to mobilise themselves. They were very frustrated with their lack of voice and very frustrated with their lack of ability to be able to input decision-making into agriculture. So it was that time when Lisa, who was then the Wide Bay Burnett rural reporter, came to me. I was her boss at the time, the executive producer of the Country Hour, and she said to me, she proposed, to establish an ABC Rural Women of the Year award, and it was really just a no-brainer. It just made so much sense. And as they say, the rest's history. Yeah.
ABC Rural was quite a male-dominated domain as well. So was there something within yourself that's gone, yeah, this hits home to me too?
I just saw the value of them. I mean, I think rural women had a really different take on agriculture and the world. As I mentioned, most of them deeply understood the finances of their business. They probably weren't as operational as the men, but they were intimately connected to the environment, to their communities and sustainable development. So there was this whole new take or outlook on agriculture that really needed to be tapped into, we felt.
And while the idea of a Rural Women's Award had found a champion in the ABC, the untested question was whether or not the invisible women of rural Australia were ready to follow this lead and come out of the shadows.
Women were reticent to put, certainly I don't recall anyone putting themselves up, but the farm organisations got behind it, is my recollection. And they nominated women and encouraged women to get involved, which was terrific.
Did that dynamic change after that first year, or was life in the shadows so hard ingrained into their psyche that it still took a while to take hold?
I think it took a long time, a really long time. It was chipping away at it was change, cultural change and things. It's evolution rather than revolution. It was a time when lots of people saw a need for there to be change, and that to recognise that most family farming businesses in those days was him and her, not just him, and it was time for her to come out of the shadows so that she could contribute even more to the farming business and have that confidence to step out, to listen to the policy debates, to get involved in the policy debates, to make meaningful contribution to the decisions that farm organisations were making to influence government policy, and to educate herself in how that farming business fitted into the broader state, national, global context, so that she could be even more effective in the role that she was already playing.
That call for rural women to step out of the shadows was given a huge boost when Lisa's boss's boss got wind of the idea.
It got even more confronting, Michael, though, because Lucy Broad was the national rural editor, and she decided within a very short space of time after Edwina decided to take this award statewide, she decided to make it national.
Yeah, they were pretty crazy days because we all sort of had full-time jobs as rural journalists, and then we were sort of mounting and facilitating this whole new big award that became bigger in Ben-Hur. So it was interesting. Like, we launched in 1994 and we started with the Wide Bay Burnett one, which really was Lisa's baby. It morphed into the Queensland Award, it morphed into every state award, and then suddenly we were launching the national award, announcing the first national winner, Deb Tearley, at the inaugural International Australian Women and Ag Conference in Melbourne. And those national gatherings became profound. They actually became the hallmark of the ABC, Radio Rural Women's of the Year award, those national gatherings. And it was profound for them just to have, be in a room with like-minded women to be discussing and talking about issues that were so common and so important to them. There was a real sense of possibilities and empowerment and achievement in these rooms and these gatherings. Yeah, it was fantastic.
The ABC ran the Rural Women's Award for 4 years, then encouraged industry to take it on. And after a few years' break, the Rural Industries Research and Development Corporation, or RIDC, now known as AgriFutures, took over on behalf of the federal government. Edwina Clowes changed careers to become the coordinator of the Rural Women's Award for the next 12 years.
They very much changed, I guess, what the award was all about. They moved it from being an award that sort of recognised and celebrated women's achievement to one of really sort of increasing the leadership capacity and capabilities of women so that we could actually actively facilitate their active involvement in decision making. And I guess a really important part of that was the bursary. The bursary became a really important conduit. So women had to come forward with a project that would support their leadership development and improve their lot in their industry or their community. So that became a really important component. That, in addition to the national award gatherings, they kept going from strength to strength, and we brought together all the winners and recipients and runners-up again for a few days gathering in Canberra for some more leadership and skills development and some networking opportunities, not only with the women themselves, but with bureaucrats and important decision makers in Canberra. We facilitated that with the state departments of primary industries and agriculture. They were really important in terms of the success of the awards because they had the extensive networks on the ground in their states, the experience and expertise in agriculture, and the boots on the ground to facilitate, the selection processes within the states, as long as the state department, along with the federal Department of Primary Industries too, was really important with strategic development.
That training and capacity building has become a hallmark of the Rural Women's Award.
I think Riddick understood that if we were to be serious about women's leadership development and capacity building, we had to up the training. So we morphed the national gathering and the national training into an intensive Australian Institute of Company Directors course to give them that governance, that sort of corporate governance training.
Did any of them give you a something of a sarcastic thank you to the AICD course? Here's an exam as your prize.
Well, I did. I used to laugh. It was the only award that gave an exam as the major prize, but it was a real draw card. Women wanted that course, and they did it. Yeah, it was amazing.
And while the training was supporting change out on the ground, the awards ceremony in Canberra was keeping the need for policy change on the national political agenda.
And as the award got bigger and bigger and bigger, we outgrew function centres, so we had to move the national dinner to the Great Hall of Parliament House. And you're right, it got to the stage where every MP, every head of government department, every head of agribusiness, asked for an invite or demanded an invite to the national dinner. It became that important and that successful. And it was a sight for sore eyes to watch these women work the room on that night of the national dinner. It was crazy. It was exciting.
Yeah, were they checking the invitation list and the tables and,
Absolutely.
Where are the ministers? Who do I need to get in front of?
Yep. And they worked it. They worked the award. They spent the time, the 2 weeks they had in Canberra, they maximised every minute in terms of conversations with people, within their industries and communities that would be powerful and important to their projects and their industries. Yeah.
Any suggestion of tokenism was put to bed by the calibre of the applicants and the quality of their ideas.
The projects they brought and thought about through this award were quite profound in terms of, export development, new Japanese markets or overseas market development, value adding and commercialisation of products. It was galvanising producers and the producer voice. It was digital technology to enable their communities. It was changing conversations and climate change. So,
some of those women sound like they were well ahead of their times in the way they were thinking about the world. Do any stand out from those early years where they really stick in your memory for what they achieved?
There are so many amazing examples. You start off with the beginning of the awards. Frances Bender, she was the 2001 Tasmanian winner. Principal in a small farming contracting company called Huon Aquaculture that has tenfold increased the number of employees there. It's now the second largest salmon farmer in Tasmania, and salmon now is, an affordable, accessible protein on everybody's plate. You think of, Deb Bain, who was the 2007, I think, Victorian...
Yeah, National Farm Day. I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, National Farm Day. She used the money from the bursary to take it from a Victorian pilot to a national event of bridging the gap between rural and city. Louisa Keeley, and she was a wool producer from Central West New South Wales. She was a sustainable farming champion, a wool grower, but she could see the risks of climate change then, back 20 years ago, and the power of, soil as a carbon sink. And she went on to co-found Carbon Farmers of Australia.
Among the early winners was our friend Jeanette Long.
So 2004, I was working for TAFE, and I was also had just finished working for what back then was IAMA, doing some of their communication and media, and had two young children. By that age, by that time, were both at school, and I was doing a lot of training for rural women in rural business management and rural office practice at TAFE. So really, I guess starting to lean into what I was passionate about in helping and supporting rural women, and recognising the massive potential that a lot of women had that wasn't being drawn on within agriculture, because most of these women that I was working with at that time hadn't chosen agriculture as a career. They'd fallen in love with a man who happened to be a farmer and found themselves in a farming business, which they were then being encouraged, of course, to get involved in and taking on a lot of the administration of those businesses without necessarily having those skills, because they may have had a career doing something else.
Tell me about your project and how you started to join a few of those dots together.
So my project was around developing women's leadership. So giving them opportunities to come together and think about where else they could get involved in the agricultural industry or their communities and take on leadership roles, or it could have even been within their businesses to do leadership roles. And I guess what was different in my approach was that I did it more as a facilitated learning approach or peer-to-peer approach rather than a delivery approach. So working with a group of women in an ongoing way where they were sharing their own experiences and building their capacity to and really their confidence to take on bigger roles within whatever it was that motivated them, I guess. Yeah.
And as a result of that project and that learning style or facilitation style, what change resulted from that project that you delivered in 2004?
So for me personally, in 2012, I was approached by back then by PIRSA to develop a South Australian rural women's leadership program. So I know it was quite a few years later, and I'd worked in quite a few spaces in between, including working in New Zealand in the Agri Women's Development Trust over there in developing women's leadership programs. So Sharon Honor and myself started co-facilitating Stepping into Leadership, which is still running today under Wattle Women Together Learning in South Australia. They've taken over the management of that program so that it will go on beyond Sharon and I hope. So that women's leadership program it's been fantastic to see women go through that program and take on amazing roles within the industry and their communities. And then from the peer-to-peer approach with my other area of interest, which is really about doing great extension and engaging extension in agriculture, I've been doing a lot of training, including in New Zealand, and a lot of work in Queensland at the moment about how to set up and facilitate peer-to-peer groups and how to facilitate learning with farmer groups so that we get practice change on ground.
At an individual level, how did you see it changing the women who are participating in those activities?
So I see an enormous amount of growth in confidence, Michael, and connecting them with other women who are in similar situations so that they realise they're not alone, and setting up that support group. So with programs like I was involved in Partners in Grain for many years, and bringing those women together, and now through the alumni we have both with the Stepping into Leadership program and the Rural Women's Award, realising that there's lots of people there that they can use as mentors, that they can lean on each other, they can provide each other with support. So I think sometimes within our own local communities, we may not have others that share that enthusiasm to get out and do something. But when we connect with that broader network, we find other like-minded people who share some of that passion, surrounding ourselves with positive people who help hold us up and work into our strengths. There's a lot more women involved in a lot of roles than we saw in the past.
And what about you as an individual in your life? How did that award change your circumstances and your outlook on the world?
It opened up a lot of opportunities for me, Michael, in terms of opportunities to take on roles chairing government boards that was offered to me as a result, that built my skills. I went on and did the company director's course as part of the program. So really opened up a lot of opportunities in that perspective, as well as, I guess, shining a light on what I was doing, which meant that other opportunities popped up because I was visible. So people saw what I was doing and what I could offer.
Such dramatic change and impact could only been dreamed of when Lisa Palu and her friend and farmer Jan Darlington conceived of the idea back at that kitchen table in Monto. The world has changed dramatically since then, and so have the lives of Australia's rural women, which begs the question of how and why have the awards continued to strike a chord with women across Australia to this very day.
It might seem like things have changed a lot, but some things haven't changed very much at all. And although I think the nature of what we are recognising and the opportunity then that presents has changed quite dramatically. So it's very much focused on an educational, helping, bursary and helping women to develop their knowledge and skills, but also providing that crucial access to a network of like-minded women, the alumni. And I think had never envisaged an alumni or any of that kind of thing back then. Of course, it was just this short-term, let's do something tangible right now that might make a difference.
I think it's an evolution. It's generational. It's incremental. What's that saying from Ruth Bader Ginsburg? It's not the weather of the day, but the climate of the era. So
Right.
It's generational. It's generational. I know, of course, we all need to work in a supportive and transparent environment with trusted people, and we need people to back us. And I think that's what this award did. It really championed these industries and communities championed these women, and it gave them permission to stand up and get stuck into something. So I think it's incremental. I think, as women and everybody becomes more educated and more sort of informed, more capable and more supportive, it just keeps going.
But with success comes new and unexpected challenges. In our next episode of Unearthed, we move forward in time to the 2010s, when the Rural Women's Award will encounter some growing pains, forcing AgriFutures and the previous award winners to have a good hard think about how the awards and the training programs that were offered with them should be restructured to remain relevant for a fast-changing modern landscape. That's next time on Unearthed. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your podcast platform to help us spread the word about the series and all of the awesome people who are changing Australian agriculture for the better. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Michael Thompson, on Unearthed, the People Changing Australian Agriculture, a podcast brought to you by AgriFutures Australia.